The story of the spies that is brought in the parasha is a very peculiar one because it seems to be all totally above board, correct, with divine permission, and in some way something goes bang. So what I did is look at the prologue and the epilogue, at the events that immediately preceded this, in the Torah at least, and it would seem to only have preceded it by a couple of days, a week or so, and then the events that followed in the parasha at the very end. And that sometimes helps to put, which is why they put prologues and epilogues in books to in stories to be able to put things in perspective and to frame it. But let's just look at the raw story first, very briefly. I think it's familiar to most of us. And then we can start picking at where things are really wrong there. So is this it? I think this is it. Yeah. So we have Hashem speaking to Moshe, and he says, "Send men to scatter the land of Canaan, which I'm going to give to the Jewish people, one man from each of their ancestors, tribes, each one a chieftain among them." And Moshe does exactly that, and off he goes and chooses these people and send them off. I'd like to just point out that they refer to here, and we'll come back to that, as men being leaders of the Israelites. So we're not talking about riffraff here, we're talking about people of standing. And here's the brief. He says, there you go. Go and find out. Yeah, go start from the south and go up right around the country, look at the land, at the people, and tell us what kind of country, what kind of people live there. Strong or weak, few or many. What about the land? Is it a good land or a bad land? I guess that means agriculturally. What about the cities? Are they fortified or are they open? What about the ground, the soil, rich or poor, wooded or not? And then bring some fruit of the land. And it happens to be the season of the ripening the first ripe grapes. So they do exactly what they were told. And they go out, they scout out the land from Tzin and going all the way up to Hamat. So they start with the southern border and then they continue on the eastern side and they go all the way up to Hamat, which is Tiberias area. There we go. In the south, they come across these giants. Yeah, they refer to here the Anakites, but Anak means a giant. So those Achiman Sheshai Talmai, and they were very scary people. And they come back after 40 days, and they come back and they give a report as they were told. So where's the problem? And they show them the fruit of the land, and they give a report about the land. They say, yes, it's a great land. Here's some fruit. However, the people who inhabit this country are powerful. Cities are fortified and very large. And we saw the Anakites there. So far, that was their brief. Right? Go, tell us about the land, the quality, the produce, and the people, strong or weak. They're doing exactly what they were asked to do. And Kalev is not comfortable with this. And he says, no, we're going to be able to go up and we'll take possession of it. We're going to overcome it. On the other hand, the other people say, no, we can't attack the people. It is stronger than us. And here's basically the story. And we get trouble with it. Because the result of this is that there is great crisis. It's referred to as the sin of the spies. We attribute the date of this terrible calamity to the 9th of Av, and the Medrash says, well, children of Israel on that night cried for no justifiable reason, and there will be cause to mourn on the 9th of Av, and it's the beginning of a series of tragedies that have befallen our people over history. So what and where did it go wrong? They followed the brief, did exactly what they were told to do, and somehow something along the line went very wrong. So let me go back to the opening verses and look at what kind of people they were and their caliber, which poses the question, how, if something went wrong, how did that happen? And we see here that they were told, here it is, right? That who did they choose to go from each tribe? Kol Nasi Vahem, the chieftains among them. So from each tribe they chose the head, the Nasi. As we know, the Nasiim, which we've seen them have quite the important role in Parashat Naso. It was where we had. Are we still there? I hope so. Where we had the children of Israel, sorry, the tribes, the heads of the tribes, each bringing so that was just in the Pasha 2 weeks ago, each bringing an offering for their tribe. But there were people of caliber. And there were leaders among the children of Israel, Anashim Roshei Bnei Israel. They are people of a very high standing. How could it be that if something went wrong, it would under their guidance and their leadership? So we need to understand this, and then at that point they're described as not such good people. Suddenly Hashem refers to them as Eidah Hara'azot, this wicked band, this wicked congregation of people. And he punishes them. And he says, no, you're all going to die in the desert. Hashem says, thus I will do to that wicked band. So where did we jump from these people of caliber, these people who are leaders, heads of the Jewish people, to suddenly them being called a wicked band? What has happened here? And here is something absolutely fascinating. How do we know, says the Talmudic sources, that for minyan, the quorum is 10? Where does that come from? How do we know that that is the number? We learn it from this gathering of people, from these spies. They're referred to as an Eidah, they're referred to as a congregation. And that's kind of the smallest number we've ever seen a group of people. How many are there? Well, there were 12 spies, right? We have 10 for one for each tribe, so 12 spies. But of course, 2 did not associate with the evil group. 2 of them was Joshua and Caleb, and they were not part of that at all. So we have 10 people. So now there's a bit of a kind of strange disconnect here. From these 10 evil people, we learn about Minyan. We learn that that's a congregation. So we've got to understand that their evilness is subject to where they came from. As they were leaders of tribes, they were people of high standing in the community. And for them, what they did is considered to be evil. But they're still people of a very high caliber, who would still call them tzaddikim. And as a rule, Hashem deals much harsher with the people who are at a higher spiritual level. I mean, the scrutiny of the Moshe and Aaron, for example, came under for their actions, for their behavior, and great tzaddikim are judged in a much harsher way. So they kind of dismissed by Hashem as an Eidah Hara'ah because of what they've done. So we need to understand that what they did was maybe not nearly as evil as commentaries quickly dismiss it to be. Prologue. what happens just before the portion of Shlach? We have the situation of the appointment of prophets under the leadership of Moshe. And Hashem told him to appoint 70 elders. 70 elders were appointed from each tribe. Two could only have 5. The other tribes each got 6, so that would add up to 70. Anyway, there is some kind of a crisis with Eldad and Medad, who are caught prophesying out in the camp, and that's kind of seen as bad, as you'll see. So let's see if I can find those verses for you. Here we go. The youngster, which you can see there's a little bit of a star here, asterisk saying that commentary said this one was Gershom, son of Moshe. You'll see why that's relevant in a moment. Ran, and he says to Moshe as follows: Eldad umeidad mitnabim b'machaneh. Eldad and Medad are, that's interesting, one acting the prophet. I would have translated with mitnabim as prophesying. That's English. And but acting the prophet, because they were genuine prophets. They had been drawn, chosen, nominated, and picked by Hashem as part of that assembly of 70 elders, and they were prophesying. So what's the big deal? They're doing their job. They were actually prophets. They became prophets. So Rashi quotes for us the nature of that prophecy. Says Rashi, he quotes from Sifri and Sanhedrin, they're prophesying Moses will die and Joshua will bring Israel into the land. Now, what is that that prophecy? Well, we know at this point, with hindsight of history, that's exactly what happened. At the end of the 40 years in the desert, which hadn't yet been decreed, of course, that happens after the spies. This is the previous portion. Moshe will get involved with Aaron in the story with the rock, and as a result, it will be decreed that they're not going to enter, and physically Moshe dies. It was probably something that was inconceivable to the people then. And such a prophecy, particularly Gershom, he's a son of Moshe. He is absolutely scandalized by the suggestion that Moshe is not going to bring him into the Holy Land, but that Joshua is going to take over. But what does that really mean? Whether Moshe was going to die physically, which I couldn't conceive of, or whether maybe the concept of Moshe would no longer apply because his leadership would be supplanted by that of Joshua. What's the difference? Moshe was a divine man. And if Moshe were to conquer the Holy Land, it would be according to miraculous principles of godliness, because Moshe didn't really live in this world, so to speak. Joshua was a traditional commander-in-chief. When there was a war against Amalek a few months before, probably a year earlier, then when there was a war against Amalek, what happened? Moshe went up on a mountain, and he's sitting there famously with his arms up, and he's doing the divine stuff, while Yeshua is actually choosing his warriors, and he's going out with weapons, and he's fighting against Amalek. So they're two models. And when that prophecy comes through, that says Moshe is going to die, whether physically or whether his leadership style is going to become obsolete, and Joshua is going to conquer the land, it means we're not going to conquer the Holy Land according to miraculous, divine kind of wars. We're going to have to go and fight for it. If that's how we're going to do it, if we're going to have traditional warfare, we need to have intel. We need to send spies. They need to go there and need to tell us which cities are fortified, which ones are easy to conquer, where there's strong people, where the inhabitants are weaker, and we wouldn't mind knowing a little bit about the economic resources while they're there as well, and give us a report about that. It's in that light, following on the prologue, that the attitude of the spies and the fact that they came back with a report, we can and we cannot, makes a lot more sense. Because if they were simply there to report on how, but not if, then they would completely out of line. But the way they understood the mission, the way the children of Israel understood the mission was, we're going to conquer it according to the leadership style of Joshua. Joshua takes weapons and he goes and physically fights with them. And therefore, we need to know whether that can be done. We need to know how it can be best done. And so, hence, the report, which kind of doesn't sit with us because we know that it's going to be miraculous conquest. We know that even though Moshe Rabbeinu isn't going to be there anymore physically, he's passed on, but Hashem is going to be with him all the time. And in every battle we see this, and there were no casualties. Initially, there was a problem in one city, in the Battle of Ai, where somebody died. We find out why that was and how that happened afterwards, where there was Achan who had, broken the vow and taking some of the spoils of war, and that caused misfortune for the Jewish people. So it's still miraculous war, but they didn't see it that way. They're looking at it from a completely different angle. However, sometimes we see things because we've got a bias. And the Rebbe explains this, and this is actually a Hasidic slant on it, and this was something very similar in the Sfat Emet, from the Gur dynasty. They had a bias. They had a strong bias against going into the land of Canaan. And that developed when they saw for themselves that land. And they came in and they saw people plowing, tilling, harvesting, and that's what we told. It was harvest time. It was a Bikur Adavim. Everyone was busy, bringing in their grapes from the vineyards, and they see people involved in the cultivating of the land, involved in a very physical pursuit in order to more sustain themselves, and that was the way one served Hashem. You would work the land, and that's how it was. They're coming from a totally different paradigm. It's been about a year that they have been living in the Mount Sinai model. The Mount Sinai model is you come face to face with God. You hear Hashem speak to you. Maybe you don't survive it, but it brings you back to life after you pass out from the sheer power of such a revelation. That doesn't happen in civilization. That happens out in the desert. They've been living surrounded and sustained by clouds of glory, by manna falling from heaven, and by the well of Miriam that sustained them. Their entire existence has been interacting with Hashem, going closer to God, raising themselves spiritually higher and higher because they've got no physical distractions. And they really liked that because there were people, as we say, of high caliber, heads of the Jewish people, and they said, kind of, this could really work for us. Do we want to leave those clouds of glory, exit them, and go into a real world where we've got to stand on a ladder and bring grapes in? Do we want to do that? Do we want to shed that rarefied atmosphere of the Dora De'ah, the generation of knowledge, as they were known, the people who knew God, not people who had heard about God, people who were taught about God or read about God in books, but the people who actually knew Hashem because they experienced his sheer power and the miracles that went on an ongoing basis. We've got a bias against that. They really want to stay in the desert and continue to have a spiritual existence that doesn't involve interacting, interfacing on a daily basis with the physical, and allows you to remain in the relationship with Hashem, which is 100% pure spiritual soaring, growing, going higher and higher. But it's wrong. It's wrong because it was not the intention. The intention of God creating a world, the intention of Hashem giving us the land, the promised land, and telling us to go there, was to live within the physical world and there to create spiritual growth. To take a world that maybe appears to be totally contradictory, denying of godliness, and to bring out sparks of holiness and to bring out the essence and the knowledge of Hashem all around that world. And that's why we had to leave the clouds of glory. That's why we had to go in. Now, it sounds almost noble. And that's why I said that the word Eidah Hara'ah must be understood from a divine perspective, not from our perspective. They weren't evil people. They were great people. And they had pure intentions, but they're the wrong intentions. And therefore Hashem said, I judge them harshly because my standards are very high for the people that I'm close with. So they're called Eidah, and that's why one can learn the laws of Minyan and the quorum of 10 from that group of people. Even though, from our perspective, we're saying, hey, God calls them evil. Why would we want to learn anything about sanctity and Minyan from them? So we put it into perspective now by understanding that they thought their mission was yay or nay, and their bias was very strong against going into Israel, and so that just fed in the two narratives, fed into each other. And there came a people saying, we can't do it. We can't conquer the land. So then what? Well, then Hashem must continue to look after us here in the desert. Epilogue. What was the amazing revelation of the desert? 1, clouds of glory. 2, sustenance of food from heaven. And 3, water from the well of Miriam, liquid nourishment. When the dust settles on the spies, there are 3 commandments at the end of the parasha. Let me share those with you. Number 1, the laws of nesachim, of libations. Libations are liquid offerings that come along with sacrifices. And incidentally, the fact that Hashem would give the Jews an instruction about that begins when you enter the land that I'm giving you to settle in, then that was huge, because the previous paragraph says, in this desert you shall die, you shall wander for 40 years. And 40 years is eternity, 40 years is a generation. And it was, they were despondent. So when the instruction comes, when you enter the land that I'm giving you to settle in, it was very gratifying, it was very encouraging. And the instruction that comes is that when you bring offerings to Hashem, they've got to come with libations. Libations consist of a meal offering with some oil, but also a quarter of a hin of wine as a libation, for each sheep that you offer. Number 2, next instruction. When you enter the land in which I'm taking you, here is the mitzvah of challah. The mitzvah of challah is that you take some of the dough aside, the bread of the land, and from your baking, you set it aside as a gift. It goes to a Kohen, and he receives this as a gift. So that is the mitzvah of challah, become very popular lately for women to get together and have challah bakes and take off challah and make the bracha, and there's great spiritual power, but it doesn't just apply when somebody is very ill, or there's a war going on, or somebody needs a shidduch and you want to do it in the merit. The mitzvah of challah is that every time you make a dough, which we don't do very often because it's easier to buy from the bakery, but every time you make a dough, you take the first portion of that dough. So whatever we had so far, we've had liquid, we've had food. And the message is, as you go forward and go into the land, You enter the land, okay, previous paragraph also, if you remember, enter the land. Okay, and that was you enter the land. And what happens when you enter the land? You put your hands in the bowl with flour and water, you mix it, and that's how bread comes. No longer comes from heaven, doesn't come from there. Now it has to be made from wheat you've harvested from the ground, and you knead your dough. There's a mitzvah of libations, which refers to liquid. So that is telling us that when we enter the land, we're not going to have the well of Miriam to give us. We're going to interact with the physical. We're not going to have the manna. We're going to bake real bread. And the third one is the clouds of glory. Clouds of glory were amazing. And one of the very, very special properties was that they took care of clothing for us. So you only had to, buy one set of clothes, and that remained with you right through the entire period in the desert. It grew with you, it got cleansed, and that was done via the clouds of glory. And the final paragraph of the parsha is the mitzvah of tzitzit. So no, you're going to wear real garments, and you're going to sanctify them by tying these fringes at the corners of your garments with the blue, little techelet, the corner of blue. So again, garments are going to be something that you're going to sanctify, but doing a mitzvah with them, it no longer will be something which is an offshoot of the miraculous manifestation, which is the clouds of glory. So the epilogue clearly tells us what the spies had thought should be, and Hashem puts the record straight by giving mitzvot that show how a Jew fulfills his full potential in living in this world, not by living in a rarefied, removed atmosphere, on the top floor of some kind of a monastery where people have pledged to remain away from the world, from its pleasures and delights, to have made vows of chastity and of silence and of poverty. We engage in the world. We're completely in it, and we find ways of sanctifying our life and the world by engaging in the world rather than removing ourselves from the world. And that sets the record straight on what the spies were so biased against, to the extent that they said, let's not go. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.